earliest memory probably is our Sundays, our family Sundays, where things were organized, where my mom, after church, would take my sisters to finish up some grocery shopping. I would go to the hospital with my dad and make rounds. We'd come back to the house. My mom would prepare a meal, and the grandparents would come over, and we'd eat for several hours, and spend Sunday together. After a while, those traditions fade a bit, and the grandparents would come over a little less frequently, but the earliest memory was seeing our grandparents every week and spending that afternoon together.
What did you like to do as a kid?
Oh, I like to do just about everything. I really enjoyed spending time with my grandfathers, both of them. They were vastly different people. I enjoyed exploring the neighborhood with my friends. That was a big thing back then. G.I. Joe was very popular. We would find my dad's old Army gear. My friends would find their dad's old Army gear, and we'd set off into the woods and pretend, just camp out using his old pots and pans, wearing his helmet, and spend an entire afternoon in the woods. And just like you saw on TV, Mom would holler out or ring a bell, and we knew it was time to come home. You just kind of knew at a certain time you had to be home for dinner. But you'd spend the entire afternoon in the woods pretending anything, from camping, sleeping in a hammock, pretending there was a war. Those are my fondest memories of neighborhood activities.
And, did you play war? How many were you?
There might have been, well, there were three solid buddies of mine when we grew up, Ralph Parisi, Paul Feinstein, and myself. But they were the neighborhood kids. But it was the first thing we did after school every day was get on our bikes and then hike up into the woods. And the woods weren't that vast, but in our neighborhood there was enough there that you couldn't see any houses. And literally we'd build a campsite. There was no fire, we just pretended there was one. But you could occupy an entire afternoon every day with imagination. It was fun.
What else did you play at?
Oh, back then Evel Knievel was popular, so we would set up all kinds of stunts, things you don't see these days. We didn't have helmets back then. We didn't have knee pads. So we'd have bike races, who could race the fastest. And my sisters were involved in this too. It wasn't unusual for one of my sisters to beat some of the boys in the neighborhood. Racing the bike as fast as you could down the block, or jumping garbage pails. We'd set up ramps and jump garbage pails and things like that, trying to imitate the stars of the time. Evel Knievel, the Lone Ranger, all the World War II buffs that we all became. Yeah. We were incredibly involved because of my mother. So we were involved in scouting. My sister's in Girl Scouting. I was involved in Cub Scouts. We were involved, I was at Little League. It was a very popular thing, although no one played soccer back then. Little League and Boy Scouts, and then the neighborhood kids just played together. We invented our own games on the street.
Like what?
Oh, we played our own little baseball games, running from sewer to sewer, this type of thing, the bike races I spoke of. We really had a very rich childhood. There were tons of activities, and very little of it involved television. It was very restricted back then. There were, I think, 2 TVs in our house, and that was considered a lot. And one of them was color, which was fantastic. So things are very different now. So most of your activities were outside. We grew up, Plainview was the town we all grew up in. We grew up in Ruby Lane and then Cornell Drive. My memories of Ruby Lane were very scant. We moved in, I believe it was 1967, 68. I believe those were the years we moved from Ruby Lane, so I was very, very young. But there was one particular incident that I have vague recollection. In fact, I brought my kids back to the Ruby Lane house, and there are flashbacks that occur. If you look at the Super 8 movies, you can see Ruby Lane, and the little flashbacks occur for all of my sisters when we look at those pictures. But one in particular was Ninette, my older sister, and I hopping in the family station wagon and imitating my parents driving. And unfortunately, we put the car in neutral, and it rolled backwards, rolled down the driveway and hit a fence that stopped us from going down onto the parkway. And my dad ran out of the house quite dramatically and got us out of the car. But that was one of the earliest daredevil moves my sister made, and I sat right along, as usual, I sat right alongside as a passenger going, this sounds like a good idea.
What kind of sense of humor did your dad have?
It's funny. As a child, you always knew Dad as the strict guy, but there was a funny side too. So he had that ability to instill fear by a funny look, so that you never really questioned him. But he was a comic, and you see it in the pictures of him in the Army. You see it in pictures of him with his friends and the medical conventions, things like that. He was the guy that made everyone laugh. and mostly I saw it making rounds.
What was your favorite subject? What was school like for you?
I loved school. I think that science always amazed me, probably because of my dad's influence. My dad's affinity towards science and the asking of why and the mystery of why and always question. And so as hanging out in the woods, whether it was biology or hard sciences like chemistry, I mean, my dad and my mom both promoted that. So when I grew up, my interest in science, they allowed me to have a small room in the house called Nikki's Lab. There was actually a sign on the door, and my dad would stock it with experiments and kits and things to do. My mom was into plants, loved planting and gardening, so I had fluorescent lights installed, and I would grow plants and cross-pollinate different zinnias and have different colors come out. These are odd. To me, I look back, and I'd be concerned about my kid doing these things. Yet somehow it seemed normal, but I don't know that it was. But it was my world, so it was my normal. So having cross-pollinating plants and having my mother's help with little Q-tips to make different color plants, and my father having me explode things in the basement and create different salts and things like that, I had this whole world going on down there. And later, photography became an interest, so that room went from a laboratory to a darkroom, and I would print photographs and develop in the trays back when you had developed things in trays before digital. So we had my own enlarger, and we had a photography hobby. That my father was a big photography buff. He entrusted me with his camera. These are my dad and my experiences as a kid were amazing, in that there were incredible moments of fun and laughter, yet there were expectations put upon me too. And
Tell me some more about those.
It was that balance. One of the examples of how I let my father down, I can remember, was his camera. You know, he was a camera buff, and he had this German camera he got in the Army. And you wouldn't just get a camera like that as a kid. And so it starts with an Instamatic 15, you know, the little flash cube camera. And he would teach me depth of field and things like that, as much as you could get out of an Instamatic 15. And then my mom, I was allowed to have my mom's Brownie, you know, the old box camera. You move it up and down, and the film's on a reel, and you had to spin it. And you focused it by moving it up and down. I still have my mom's Brownie. So I learned to shoot pictures with a flash bulb that if you touched it after the flash went on, you burned the skin off your hand. So and literally you could start a fire with that thing. So I would shoot pictures with a Brownie. And actually it was the Brownie first. I had to learn how to shoot on that first. And then I got the Instamatic 15, which was the new camera of the 70s, because it had a flash bulb. So I started with the Brownie first, and when I showed responsibility in both how to take pictures and taking care of it was as important as executing. Then I got an Instamatic 15 as a gift with flash bulbs. And eventually I graduated to earn the responsibility to have my dad's Zeiss. And it was an amazing camera. It was a SLR camera. It was his from the Army. And I did my best caring for it. And I can remember this was a lesson learned. My dad came in my room one day. I didn't have the lens cap on it. You always have your lens cap. You're a photographer, right? You always have the lens cap on. When you're not using it, there's only one place that lens cap. It's on the lens to protect the lens. The lens is everything. And I didn't. I forgot. And I lost that camera. Yeah. So it's one of those moments where you say, and I watch my kids going, I don't want them to feel the pain. And you don't want, but that taught me something. You know, he didn't take it away and say, here it is tomorrow, you forgot the lens cap on. I didn't see that camera again for quite a long time. And he said, you let me down. And he was right, I did. But you know, I learned not to do that again. Other opportunities came up where he trusted me again. And I remember the camera experience. And I didn't let him down again. And on occasion you did. I was a kid, so there were a few other times where I screwed up. But you learned, man, it was important to learn things too, not just to have the easy path. You forgot, don't worry about it. You know, accountability, being responsible for your own decisions, that things have repercussions. These are tough lessons to teach in the context of I love my kids and I don't want them to ever feel pain. Sometimes pain is a good thing. And that was one of those moments where I couldn't believe it. I was so decimated because I had earned that camera over a long period of time and I lost it that quickly by being careless. message taken, don't be careless.
You also learned a lot of other things from your dad. He was a real hands-on, go to it, fix it, do it person.
Yeah, one of my dad's messages to me was, to all of his kids really, is that, your limits are only what you set them at. You can do anything. And that was a very grandiose thing to say to a kid, you can do anything. And he also said to me, I don't care what you do, just be the best at it. Don't do anything halfway. God gives you gifts, and one of the biggest sins is, not everybody can be the President of the United States, not everybody can be X, Y, Z, but to not use your gifts to the fullest is a sin. You have gifts, use them to their fullest. They're there for a reason. Don't do anything halfway, don't do anything sloppy. Do everything to the best of your ability, and you'll benefit, and people around you will benefit because of it. So I do live that life philosophy, I think. I try. Nothing was impossible in our world. When things broke, we fixed them. We're the Marine, we fix things. He prided himself on, I may be a doctor, but I fix anything. You have to fix it first before you can call a repairman. And how do you know he's going to do a good job? So an example would be the pool heater broke. My dad would always have this line, what's a pool heater? It's just a cylinder of copper that a flame heats up the water in. I remember thinking to him, what? And he's right. And I had this book, what makes it run? How does it work? What makes it fly? I still have it downstairs. I have many things. I saved that book. He bought it, I remember, and it was an event at Madison Square Garden our parents took us to, and that was the book he and I picked out for me. And I have it downstairs. What makes it fly? How does it work? What makes it go? And it was a kid's book on everything from a washer dryer to a car to a telephone. And it demonstrated how every appliance in your house and everything in your life works in simplistic fashion. I used that book up until high school to fix things. If the washer dryer broke in the house, I fixed it. Whatever it was, I fixed it. And I remember the pool heater, and we went out there and we cut that pipe out, took it down to the radiator place, soldered in a new pipe, and fixed the pool heater. I remember one time in the cars, back then you could fix cars, everything. I fixed everything. I didn't know what I was doing. There was no Google. You had to pull out the owner's manual. I got out my book, What Makes It Fly. They had a picture of the engine with a mouse running on a wheel and an egg beater, and I knew that wasn't how the car worked. So I had to come up with a better plan, so I found the owner's manual. And it was not unusual for me to take the car apart, put it together, and tell my dad. And my dad would come home and say, excellent job, son. And he'd say, what are those over there? And I said, extra parts. I'm not sure where they go, but the car's running. And he would shake his head and go, don't take the car apart too often. And I would take the car apart and fix things. One day I took the whole engine apart as much as I could, cleaned everything, painted it, and put it back together. And I had extra parts again. And despite all the extra parts, the car always ran. We don't even know what those parts did, but the car ran. So one day the pool wall collapsed. We had a swimming pool. And I remember looking at my dad. I was in high school. And my dad said, what's a pool but a hole with a bunch of water in it? I thought, he's not really going there, is he? This is a pool. This is a little bit bigger than something I've handled. And he said, it's just, you got to drain the water down. And sure enough, we meant me, and he went to work, and I drained the water down. I took up the bricks in the patio. It had to be 10 feet wide, 20 feet long. Then I had to dig the ditch 5 feet down, 20 feet across. It took me quite a bit of time. I dug the ditch, and there's the pool wall. Back then, the pool was made of plywood, and the pool wall had collapsed. It had been 10 years old or so, the pool. It was time for it to be repaired. I pulled out the pool wall with the liner, put in a new pool wall. He came in, checked my work like the inspector. We backfilled it, and we fixed the pool. And there's nothing you can't do if you think about it enough. And that, came true when it became time to pick a career. I was very concerned. My dad was an MD. We had a lot of MDs not a lot, but several MDs in the family. And I had this affinity because of whatever reason. My mother, growing up with chickens, my grandfather's love for animals. I wanted to be a vet. I love science, I love medicine, but I wanted to be a vet. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table saying to my dad, I know I want to go into medicine, but I think I want to go into veterinary medicine. And I asked him if he'd be disappointed. And he said no. He said, just be the best you can be the best veterinarian there is. Do it. And I was surprised. I thought he was going to say no, go become a real doctor, but he didn't. So he supported me. Ninette was the oldest, so she was the trailblazer of the family. She was the older sister. She was the one who broke the ice, the one the parents had to figure out how to raise kids on. Now that I have my own kids, I realize it's tough, There's no instruction manual, and the first kid has it rough. So Ninette was the one who they learned from, and Ninette was the one who was out there. She had no issue at all breaking ice and breaking ground. So she was the older sister. She was the one who led the pack and kind of made the rules, and we followed her lead.
How many years apart are you?
We're all about a year apart.
Okay.
So there are 4 kids approximately every year. Ninette and I are about a year and a half apart. So Ninette and I kind of grew up, I grew up in Ninette's shadow. Even through high school, I was always her kid brother. In middle school, I got the teachers she just had. So it kind of helped for me because she kind of made the first wake that I got the draft behind her in. And it helped, you know. She kind of gave me advice along the way as what to do and what not to do, introduced me. So going through the school system, having an older sister really was a blessing. And Ninette, because she's a trailblazer, probably exposed me to more things than I would have myself. Ninette was the daring one. So she was the one who had the car idea when we were children on Ruby Lane and thought, let's play driving together and put the car in neutral. That was Ninette. I was the bystander who rolled down the driveway with her. Ninette was a big horse buff as a kid and very artistic. So she was into art and painting, and horses were a big part of her life. And I was into animals too, so I followed that lead. It was fun. Ninette and I would ride horses back then. I think it was about $5. My dad would drive us down, drop us off at the horse farm near our house, and we would rent a horse for $5 for the day. And Ninette and I would saddle up. This is, of course, we didn't know much about helmets back then, and there was no one riding with you. You had the horse for the day, and you rode into the trails. And then my dad would come back at 4 or 5 o'clock and pick us up. And I remember helmets were becoming the thing back then because there was a girl that got hurt. My dad's way of teaching us was he brought Ninette and I to the hospital to visit a girl who got hurt and said, I want you to wear helmets. That was the way my dad taught us. He wanted you to wear a helmet and wanted to show you how dangerous it was. He showed you a kid in a coma and said, see this kid? She wasn't wearing a helmet, and look at her. And we thought, okay, it's time to put on a helmet. And it was a kind of abrupt way to learn, but nothing like reality checks. So we learned helmets. And Ninette and I would ride. We had a great time one particular horse ride. We went out for a trail ride, and we got lost. And I followed Ninette's lead, which led off somewhere that ended up onto the roads, which we're not supposed to be on with the horses, but we were lost, and it was getting dark, and my dad was getting nervous because we were supposed to be back by 4 o'clock. And he let them know, and I think they went out looking for us. There was a search party launched, and we ended up riding back on the streets with the traffic lights amongst the cars. We trotted back and entered the park from the entranceway, but people were pointing to these 2 kids on horses, riding the horses back. So we had some interesting times, Ninette and I.
Tell me some more about that.
Let's see, Ninette. What else can I say about Ninette? Well, Holy Family was a big part of our lives. All of us children went to Holy Family High School. And Ninette, being the oldest, was the one who broke that ice. You know, we hadn't gone to Catholic school. Ninette was the first one who broke into the Catholic school scene and did it with quite a splash. So Ninette was into softball, into volleyball. She kind of knew everybody. So I had the umbrella of the big sister going through Holy Family, which was a little tough coming in. A lot of these kids knew each other. They all went to grammar school together. So by the time I entered Holy Family as a freshman, I think Ninette was already a sophomore. No, Ninette was a junior. Ninette was a junior. So nothing like having an upperclassman sister to get the other people to lay low, get off your back a bit. So I appreciate the umbrella of protection she offered. Ninette, well, one of the more devastating things as a childhood experience is when you lose a family pet. And I can remember one of our dogs was Ginger, our first Ginger we call her. Was a very well-trained dog, and my dad would let her out, and she'd run around the block to the woods and relieve herself and come back home. And one night I remember the dog got hit by a car, and the man who hit her felt terrible, but she wasn't going to make it. And you know, everyone had to assemble in Ninette's room. I think Ninette's the oldest, so she's notified first, and all of us assemble in Ninette's room. And my dad came in to have the big conversation with us, and you know, she probably got the news before the rest of us because she seemed to be up already and had the room set for the others to come in there. And my dad broke the news that we lost the family dog, but Ninette was the one who kept it in check. And you know, she was the big animal person too. We all loved Ginger, but you know, she played that role. Rosette's the middle sister, so she was probably the most obedient, whereas Ninette liked to push the envelope and challenge the limits. Rosette was more about listening to mom and dad and obeying the rules. So she stayed out of trouble probably more than all of the kids combined. So Rosette was the one everybody liked, the crowd pleaser, the non-controversial kid, mom's helper. She was the fun one who just kept everything at ease. I can remember one time that the kids decided that we were going to go on strike and maybe even run away. We decided we had enough of this oppressive behavior by our parents, making us to go to bed at a certain time or some cataclysmic event like that. No dessert for dinner. And we decided to run away, and Rosette broke ranks from the group and somehow leaked it to the parents that we were running away, and came back and kind of disbanded the revolution before it got off the ground. Rosette was the one who, when I was going to participate, back then they were called rumbles. When one middle school was going to challenge another middle school, you might meet behind the library and duke it out. These days things are handled differently, I guess, on the internet. So yeah, we showed up for a rumble on our bicycles to duke it out with some other school, and Rosette ratted me out, and my mom came down there and picked me up from a rumble, which is pretty embarrassing to have your mother. So that was Rosette. She kind of kept us out of trouble. One of Rosette's qualities, and she probably got some of that from Grandpa Marino, and now you think back on it, was that hard work in Rosette. Rosette didn't have any reservation about doing any job. So when it came time for high school level jobs, looking around, there were the easy jobs, and then there were the jobs that paid the money. And you know, when you look at a job, it was to make some money to do something, save it for a car, this type of thing. And I remember Rosette answered a job once for a pool company. And for better or for worse in our family, some of the family tasks were gender oriented. My job would be to fix things and take out the garbage, where the girls would set the table. These types of gender persuaded jobs. Well, Rosette's job that she was answering the ad for was working for a pool company. And my job was to check the chemicals on the pool. But it was more than that. She worked at a pool company and had to operate a forklift and had to move drums of chlorine around, and it required training, and she had to be trained and test water and make recommendations. And I remember my dad thinking, really? You're in high school and you're going to, and she jumped right in, and it blew everyone's mind. Rosette was in there and did it quite well, and did that for an entire summer. She became an expert on managing pool quality, and she could drive a forklift to boot. And she was proud of it and said, look at that. And she did it herself. That was not a job that was created for her, not a job a phone call was made. You know, when we each got jobs, we searched around. Sometimes we got a job at the local hospital, and my job was in the engineering department, where, surprisingly, I learned to fix things. You know, there's my dad teaching me how to fix things. And my job was in the engineering department, where I worked as an apprentice and learned how to fix air conditioning, boiler, carpentry, electrical, where Rosette took a job in the kitchen. Now, she could have took a job in other places that were easier, but she took a job in the kitchen. And I would often go in the kitchen to do a repair, and it wasn't unusual for the kitchen to be between 95 and 100 degrees sometimes. And people were working hard work, 100-degree heat, working with some everyday folks that are busting it to pay their bills. And right alongside them, there's my sister. She's got the hairnet on, and she's pumping out and laughing and joking around. And when you take your breaks, everyone sits at the table, and Rosette's there. And these women are telling stories of what it's like to grow up in Haiti and what's it like to grow up here and there. And you heard the stories. So as much as we heard from our grandparents, some of these jobs created these incredible experiences where some of Rosette's friends came from third world countries and were working hard to make ends meet, to make a future for their family. And I think I saw them probably the same way Rosette saw them as. Those were our grandparents. They may not be as old as our grandparents, but I saw my grandfather in some of these people. I particularly worked with a guy from Poland who was trying to send money over to bring his family over. The same stories I heard my grandfather tell about his experience 50 years earlier, I'm hearing from these people. I think Rosette saw it too. So there was a camaraderie there. We felt like there was a bond, and she had no trouble rolling up her sleeves and working alongside and sharing that experience. I think to some degree, it connected you with your grandparents and their stories when you worked that hard. So Jackie is the kid sister of the group. Although we're all 1 year apart, she definitely is the kid sister. You can't imagine there's differences in such a tight cluster of kids, but there is. So she was the baby of the group, and the one who who was the most fashion forward, the most out there. So whereas Ninette was the trailblazer and the leader, and Rosette was conforming to all the rules, and somehow I was the only boy, so I got my niche. Jackie's niche was carved out largely through fashion. It could be her hairstyle, it could be her outfit, but most of Jackie's existence was that. She would enter a room and command attention instantly, and she had the gift of communication, the gift of gab. She's a very social person. So Jackie could enter the room with the most modern and out there of hairstyles or the most dramatic of outfits, and as only she could put together. And that was kind of a flair of my mother's. My mother was very fashion attentive. And of all the sisters, Jackie was probably the most like that. So between her and my mother, they got to play a little bit. So Jackie would come out there with the latest hairstyle and the latest outfit, enter the room with a big bang, and it would be the conversation for the next 30 minutes of how she got her hair to do that, or where she got the outfit from, and she reveled in the attention and enjoyed it, and it really did, was a piece of the puzzle. It created the family moments. When you look at the family pictures, you can see my mom's flair for fashion attention touched all of us, including me. I had a full array of leisure suits growing up of every color, but Jackie stood out as the most fashion forward of all of us, I think.
What are some of her other qualities?
Let's see. Well, Jackie's the most social of all of us. I think Jackie's the one who, at a party, kind of bops between everybody and brings everyone together. Her friends are the most outrageous of all the friends, so she spans a group of friends that have a variety of personality types. So whereas all my friends may be one way, Jackie's got friends that pretty much do everything everywhere. And she does have the ability to talk to just about anyone, and that was my mom's gift too. My mom was the mayor, and I think Jackie serves that role too. My mom knew everyone in town and knew what everyone was doing. When we grew up in high school, she knew that, and Jackie knows it too. If you watch Jackie growing up, she clearly got that quality and that gift from my mother. She knows who's dating who's seeing who, what's going on. She's the counselor and the therapist for those engaged in these relationships, and my mom played that role. That's an important role to play in a family.
You are the big brother. You're the man in the house.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about that.
I grew up as the only brother, the only son in the family, which if you ask my sisters, oh yes, you were the chosen one, you were the son. So yes, I did get some special treatment, especially from my mom. It wasn't unusual that my mom would make a pie, and then you would see a pie maybe a pecan pie in the fridge, and then there'd be a pie labeled Nikki's pie. So the family split up one pie, and the second pie was for me to devour. So there was some of that special treatment being the only boy. I also had to put up with a lot of estrogen in the family, so that you grew up with three sisters was interesting and beneficial in the long run. Because you
How
learn,
do you define interesting?
well, you're a boy, so you grow up with a certain mental way of thinking about things, but you really are intrigued because you're surrounded by three sisters. And it's a learning experience in a very positive way. Having had some friends that grew up with all boys in the family, I realized how much they missed out on not growing up with sisters, not learning how girls think. Just by growing up with three sisters, listening to their thought process, it becomes second nature to you when you have three sisters, how women think, and you kind of can adapt. It certainly benefited me because having had three sisters, when I entered my residency program, it was almost an all-female surgery department, and my residency program was almost all females. So I was immersed in a work environment where there was almost all women, and I was nicknamed the Newfie. The guy who could put up with a lot of, no matter who was screaming at what level, you couldn't shake me. I became inflappable, and I also became accustomed to nuances in behavior that were quite familiar growing up, and then I was blessed with three daughters. So
Did
here
you
I am.
ever have to come to their rescue?
Come to the rescue. My parents were very good at keeping us savvy enough that there weren't many rescue situations to occur, and Ninette wasn't one who particularly needed to be rescued. For Ninette, it was mostly someone else needed to be rescued, so Ninette was pretty self-sufficient, took care of herself, and I can't imagine there were too many circumstances there she needed to be rescued. There were a few episodes where, there was some experimentation with alcohol. I remember Ninette and I would sneak out and try some alcohol or try some wine together. We'd
figure out how to sneak it by the parents, these types of things. And Clearasil bottles was back then. We'd sneak some alcohol to a party or something like that. But no, there weren't too many rescue situations. But there was different levels of responsibility and accountability. So although I got the, quote, special treatment, there was also the other end of the equation. When the house flooded or there was when the snow was building up out front and Pop was going to have to leave early for work in the morning, it was never a thought, I think, that my sisters would get out there and shovel the driveway and walk at 11 o'clock or even 3 o'clock in the morning. That would be me. I don't think there were any notion, I never would ask them to, because we considered foreign. It would be the boys' job that when the power went out and the pumps would fail in the basement and water would start coming in the house, I was the one down there with the jet vac and my dad pumping out the sump pumps. And I remember we lost power in a particularly bad storm in the 70s for like 5 days. Things iced up, like the fish tank water froze. The house dropped down to the 30s. And my parents decided that my mom and my sisters would go to a hotel and stay there where it was warm, where there was electricity. And there was no thought in my head I was going anywhere. I was 10 or 11 years old. It's probably 11. I was with Dad at the house. Someone had to man the house, but it wasn't even a thought in my head it would be any other way. Like, oh, you should stay with Mom and the girls while Pop takes care of the house. Come on, son, we're getting in the car. And we would man the pumps. Frigid cold, middle of the night, and we're sucking water out. And those were expected. These things were expected. They weren't discussed. And it kind of sets the tone of who you are. There's certain things you just plain have to do. That expression, a man's got to do what a man's got to do. I have a shirt that says that, and my kids laugh about it. But there's no thought that my mother should do that, and my sisters too. That was for me to handle with my dad. One of the things my sisters would complain about is, they had a curfew. You had to get the car home by a certain time. So my dad said if the car broke down, I'd have to come get you. He said, the car breaks down with him in it, he's sleeping in it. We'll get him back in the morning. He'll figure out how to fix it himself or call one of his buddies, and that's the way it was. So yeah, I did have some extra benefits, but with that came some extra responsibilities, and I was pretty good about living up to those responsibilities, I think. From their perspective, from the sister perspective, here's the boy getting the special pie, and here's the boy getting the special treatment, and I can see it that way from their perspective. The other elements also play a role too. When the swimming pool broke, it wouldn't be the sisters that would dig the 20-foot ditch and fix the pool. That would be the boys' job. And I remember one time the antenna, back then there was an antenna on the roof to receive television reception, and the lightning bolt hit the house, the antenna, and burned out all the cables on the roof. And my dad's philosophy, it's just an antenna with a bunch of wires on the roof. Take care of that, son. And there I was. I can remember probably being 13 years old, maybe 14. Certainly I wasn't in high school. And I had to put that ladder against the house. I climbed up to the first roof without any fear. But then I had to put the ladder on the second level to get to the second level of the Colonial. I was shaking so bad I could barely stand that ladder. And I climbed up to that second roof, and it's midsummertime, sucking wind. And I remember sitting up there with a spool of cable, and I started rewiring the antenna of the house. We probably had 3 or 4 TVs at the time, and had to run the wires across all the TVs to rewire all the TVs in the house. I remember looking down at my sisters laying by the pool, thinking to myself, this boy stuff isn't so hot after all, because they were laying down by the pool as I was on the roof rewiring the house mid-summertime. So I guess that's one of those things that everyone's perspective is different. Well, my dad wanted to, I guess, lead by example too. So he did. But I don't think it was lead by example so I could become a mini him. I don't think that was his message on any level. He spoke as much about his father and his contributions as he did his grandfather, Leonardo, and his great-grandfather. So from my dad's perspective, he wanted me to understand that you're a Marino, and that meant something. And try to define that over a childhood of life experiences. It meant being honest. It meant being hardworking. It meant being someone could count on. It meant being the best at what you could do. These were the messages sent to me through a variety of life stories and life experiences